Hello, my name's Justin McClure, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about Tod, 1D in his first name, Browning.
Best known during his lifetime as a close collaborator of Lon Chaney Sr. in a number of silent shockers.
Shockers!
Best known to audiences today, perhaps, as the director of the 1931 Bela Lugosi Dracula, but most beloved among cinephiles as the director of 1932's Freaks.
But among cinephiles as well, not usually held in that much of a high regard.
Yeah, he's somebody who has his fans, but it's not so much for his incredible mise-en-scène or his facility with the camera, although I do think many of his movies have a lot of indelible imagery in them.
Yes.
It's more for his obsessions. He has a very dark and twisted worldview. Many of his films deal with physical abnormalities. Many of his films deal with toxic family relationships, and many of his films are about, let's call it, the incel lifestyle.
Yes. Incel is a perfect way to say that.
You know, men who have some sort of a disability, who long after a woman who is out of reach.
Sometimes they don't even have disabilities. Sometimes they're faking disabilities.
Yes.
And, they just want the woman to touch them. And usually at the end of the film, the men will do some evil thing and have not a change of heart, but sacrifice themselves.
The line between civilization and barbarism is often very tenuous in his movies. And, you know, because of all this, Dracula, even though it's, I think, still his best known movie, I wouldn't even call it one of his most characteristic movies.
No.
It doesn't have those obsessions in it.
I would say that, like, Mark of the Vampire is more Tod Browning-ish, things that interested him, than Dracula, the one that is mostly famous for Bela Lugosi's performance, let's be honest.
Let's talk a little bit about Dracula.
Okay.
I didn't revisit it for this podcast.
I did not either, because we did it on the Bela Lugosi episode.
That's right. But let's get it out of the way a bit, because I actually kind of like Dracula.
I think it's okay. I understand what you like about it as well. It's like, you got the big musty castles, you got the cobwebs, you got the Bella doing a thing.
But I think most of what everyone likes about Dracula comes in the first 20 minutes.
Yes.
And after that, it starts to become kind of rough sledding. It's very stagey. It's based on the stage version of Dracula, actually.
And you can't talk about Tod Browning's Dracula without saying, well, the Spanish version is actually probably better directed than Tod Browning's.
And you know what?
It is. Yep.
There are so many scenes in Tod Browning's Dracula that there's no excuse to not have done them better. So the scene where Van Helsing pulls out the box with the mirror in it and shows Dracula's reflection, and Dracula knocks it out of his hand. The way Browning films it, you're not even sure it's a mirror. You don't see the mirror.
I mean, you just feel Browning, like, doing the journeyman job. Like, listen, this is what they want me to do. He hasn't even really made any kind of movie like this before. Like, the supernatural is something that seemed to disinterest him to the point that supernatural movies that he would make would end with them going, ha ha ha, it was all a ruse, because that's what interests him. Like, the idea of, like, trickery and circus folk and show, as opposed to, oh no, this is actually real, supernatural, unexplainable evil.
Much of what's great about Dracula, I think, is attributable to the cinematography of Karl Freund, the production design, and, you know, as you said, Bela Lugosi, who is, I think, the one really missing element of the Spanish version.
Yes.
It doesn't have a charismatic lead like that. Also, in Browning's Dracula, you don't even see Dracula killed. He gets killed off screen.
But just as a point of comparison, we could compare it to the 1935's Mark of the Vampire, which on paper seems like, yeah, Tod Browning, Bela Lugosi getting back together again. They're doing technically an unofficial sequel to Dracula, because this is not a Universal production. And what you get is not a Dracula film. What you get is, spoiler alert for a film that came out in 1935, not even a vampire movie. It's just people think that it's a vampire, and it's actually just a whole pretend thing to set up the reveal of a murderer who reveals his murder by being hypnotized. There seems to be a lot of extra steps that were taken here.
This movie's like 62 minutes, and the first 60 minutes are great.
Yeah, because you're like, oh yeah, all this fun bloodsucking's going on. Even though Bela Lugosi, they might as well just taken like a wooden board of Bela Lugosi because he doesn't talk.
Yeah, most of the movie is dominated by Lionel Barrymore as the I want to say Van Helsing type figure, who, really hams it up and chews the scenery, and it unfolds on these great big Gothic sets. Browning kind of plagiarizes himself from Dracula a lot. There's even the shot of
the armadillo walking by,
going through the castle. Yeah,
lots of good big fake bats that are flying through the set,
but foggy cemeteries. I was watching
we love that stuff.
I was watching Mark of the Vampire, and I was like, this has all the things I like in it until that
Scooby-Doo ending,
which is ridiculous.
Which is just the reveal that, Bela Lugosi and his partner were just pretending to be vampires to get the person to confess. And in the final moments, you finally get Bela Lugosi talking, saying, this was so much fun! We should do this again! Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That could only disappoint every child coming to see this movie. No kid likes for it to be revealed that, all the fun stuff you saw, that's not real. It was all a joke. And I mean, Mark of the Vampire is a remake of London After Midnight, which is the famous lost Tod Browning movie, where Lon Chaney appears as a monster in it. You see all these stills. But that movie also ended with, none of this is real. So it's who cares?
Yeah.
But jumping back, Tod Browning's history. Where did he come from, Will?
He was born in Louisville. He was raised in a pretty well-to-do family, but at age 16, he ran away to join the circus. He literally did that.
Yes.
And this, by the way, was at a time when, I don't know if the circus is still held in high regard now, but at the time it was definitely not held in high regard. If you joined the circus, you were on the fringes of society.
But back then, that's when the circuses were great.
Oh, yeah. That's when there were no human rights laws.
No, nothing.
People were just exploited and life was cheap. So among the things that Tod Browning did when he was at the circus were he was buried alive repeatedly, and they would have this tube that would, go 6 feet under that spectators could come and look and see him buried alive. And then, during slow periods, they'd drop, a bit of water down for him, and he would drink. He would be down there for 24 hours. I don't know how he went to the bathroom. Maybe he didn't.
I mean, it makes sense that this would be an extension to what would obsess him in cinema, this idea of an individual suffering for his art and for entertainment, whether it be the story he's telling or what Lon Chaney Sr. is doing to himself.
This week I read the, I think, definitive biography of Tod Browning.
Probably the only one that will ever exist.
Dark Carnival by David Scull and Elias Savada. And as it points out, it's very little is known about Tod Browning's early life. Even some of the things we hear about him performing at carnivals has been exaggerated, because most of what we know about his early life comes from studio ballyhoo.
Just making up stuff to make him seem more interesting.
Yeah, but we do know that he ran away from home. So things were not good in his home life, and perhaps that informs the toxic worldview that he
I mean,
had.
if you're going to run from home, your life probably sucks.
Yeah.
And that definitely is seen, as you said, in the movies that he made, because Tod Browning's not a man that's known for his comedy or even his comedic scenes. He's known for misery and a kind of gruesomeness that could only exist before the Hays Code came into existence.
Another defining event in his life came in 1915, I believe, when he was driving his car, speeding with a car full of party guests, and he crashed it, and most people in the car died except for him.
And somebody else survived as well, but they were injured very badly.
Yeah.
And
Browning himself was injured quite badly in it as well. I know that he had dentures before that, but he
lost his front teeth in the process.
Yeah.
And he was already in the film industry at that point. He got started in the way that a lot of people do. He actually knew D.W. Griffith, and they acted together in some one-reelers. Tod Browning did a bunch of comedy skit. He was famous for using a cane and how he could trip over his legs.
Browning also worked with Max Sennett at Keystone, and Browning was an extra in D.W. Griffith's Intolerance.
Yeah.
And, transitioned into a career, as so many did, directing two-reelers.
And if you look at his filmography, essentially 8/10 of Tod Browning's directorial efforts are just lost to time. They're gone, they were destroyed, or they were forgotten. And the features that still exist are just a little chunk of what he did. So it's interesting to watch them and be well, are these what always obsessed him, or were these the culmination of what he discovered, this interests me, so I will revisit these things over and over and over again with his best pal, Lon Chaney Sr.
The surviving films, I think, are probably 50% hack work and then 50% stuff that he threw his passions and his weird preoccupations in. And, some of his major films, like London After Midnight, are lost to the sands of time. For somebody who is not particularly well regarded as a technical filmmaker, he was one of the early directors to be influenced by German Expressionism. Mm-hmm. So a film like one of his breakthrough films, The Unholy Three, has a famous shot of shadows cast against a wall. So I don't know, he has this reputation as not being technically adept, but I think there are lots of incredible images in his film.
I think it's there, and I think that his reputation rests a lot on Dracula, and that people seeing it and it's a classic and then being disappointed by it. But at the same time, you can watch his earlier films, and I know me and you watched a lot this week to just get a better idea of who he was, and you do see his preoccupations, and one of them is not necessarily being that exciting in his stories.
Yeah.
Because the Lon Chaney ones, and he made 10 features with Lon Chaney Sr., they're really about tortured individuals who drive themselves out of the point of insanity, almost always to the point of death.
One that we both watched and we both really liked was The Unknown.
Yeah, after Freaks Dracula, The Unknown is the one that people go to. And it's famous for also being cut, but that also means that it wraps up at a sweet 55 minutes.
Oh, love it.
And it doesn't feel like you're missing anything.
Lon Chaney Sr. stars in this film as a armless man, or is he?
Wink.
An armless man who works at the circus, throwing knives with his feet. He loves one of the performers at the circus, and he longs after her, and she'll often say in the film, "Oh, I hate men's hands."
Yeah,
I
can't
her so.
stand them touching me. And Lon Chaney Sr. is like, I'm your friend. I will always stick by you. And she's like, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have you here as a friend. And then Lon Chaney goes to his trailer where, he reveals he actually does have arms, and his assistant and him plot on how they can make Joan Crawford fall in love with him.
It would be spoiler territory to talk about what happens after this, and I do think people should watch this movie.
What's the most extreme kind of thing that you can do if you're in love with a woman that you assume will love an armless man and you're just faking it? Well, you'll have to see to find out.
And then what happens if she doesn't even go for you after that?
Well, you swear revenge.
Yeah.
On the man that she loves, who, which you see in a few Tod Browning films, is a circus strongman.
This archetype of a frustrated man who is either an incel or has been cuckolded, to use the parlance of our times, recurs in West of Zanzibar, which we also both watched. Probably liked a little bit less.
And if you're not familiar with Lon Chaney Sr.'s work, especially with Tod Browning, his thing is, how can he physically mutilate himself and appear on screen in a different way? So in The Unknown, he plays with his arms supposedly very painfully tied behind his back, so it doesn't look like he has arms. And in West of Zanzibar, he plays a man who's been paralyzed, who has to drag his legs along with him throughout most of the movie.
This one was based on a stage play with some very notable changes from the play. The plot is that Chaney has this long feud with this man who has had an affair with his wife. And then his wife runs off with this man, comes back with a child who Chaney assumes is the other guy's kid. And Chaney says, okay, I'm going to
dedicate my life to revenge.
Yeah, I am going to ruin this guy's daughter's life for 18 years. And in the original stage play, he goes to this island where he becomes a Dr. Moreau-like figure.
Yes.
And he puts the daughter into a life as a sex worker at a local brothel until she gets syphilis. They changed that in the film, so now he still goes to the island and he still rules it, but the daughter is now an alcoholic.
And like a lot of these Lon Chaney, Tod Browning films, it takes place in a very exotic, racistly depicted location.
Yeah.
So it's obvious that Tod Browning likes these out there places, but like most people working in Hollywood, or as someone who made a career, early when he was acting, performing in blackface, he presents them in the most stereotypical and offensive ways possible.
Sure. Very atmospheric, though, gotta say.
Yeah, I mean, it is. He actually cast actual black actors as opposed to people in blackface,
right?
Which a lot of other movies did, but that's, know.
It's definitely a film of its time, let's say.
But West of Zanzibar builds to its Old Boy-like twist, where, oh man, I hope people listening to this have seen Old Boy, because we're about to spoil it.
Let's spoil West of Zanzibar, because we're not necessarily recommending this one.
No, we're not.
Turns out it was Lon Chaney's daughter the whole time.
Oh no!
Oh, and also part of the plot was that, his enemy would come there, and if he kills his enemy, it's the tribal ritual that if a man dies, then he has to be burned along with his wife and daughter. Mm-hmm. So the daughter was also going to be burned, but then they have to sneak the daughter off the island.
And Lon Chaney, like in The Unknown, sacrifices himself at the last moment for the greater good. And these
after ruining her life for 18 years.
And these sacrifices are really interesting because they're based in the idea that what he's doing is true, that like his actual emotions are dedicated to this, when these movies have shown these people to be petty, petulant monsters who, if they were threatened, would probably let the other person die in an instant because they have dedicated themselves to this awful revenge.
This is a recurring thing in the Chaney Browning movies, where at the end Chaney never gets the girl. The Unholy Three, which is another one that I watched, it's about 3 circus sideshow performers who become a crime sin to get together. Chaney plays an old woman, dressed as an old woman, and there's a little person who plays a baby, literally the baby, and there's a strong man who helps them with the muscle.
The strong man really got the easiest job on the Unholy Three.
Yeah, but at the end of the movie, somebody dies in the movie, but at the end of the movie, Chaney confesses so that somebody else doesn't go to jail. The law is lenient on him, but he still doesn't get the girl that he's been longing for through the whole movie.
It almost feels like the Hollywood system is trying to struggle with the idea that Lon Chaney is playing bad people, but he's starring in these movies, so he can't just be defeated at the end and be unrepentant, because then why did we follow this person the entire time? Even though those endings are completely the antithesis of what the film is leading up to there. And what do you think of Lon Chaney's performances in these films?
I really like them.
I mean, he's just like this, smirking, struggling, in pain figure in all of them, anger furrowing his brows.
West of Zanzibar is kind of interesting because, in most of his movies, he had that nickname, the Man of 1,000 Faces. In most of the movies, he's heavily made up and unrecognizable, but in West of Zanzibar, he basically just uses his face.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most interesting part about Lon Chaney.
And he really, really throws his face into it.
I got to watch Where East is East, which came out in 1929, and I feel a little bit bummed you didn't get to watch it, Will, because it was actually the one I enjoyed the most out of that whole cycle.
Okay.
Where Lon Chaney plays a man whose daughter is getting married to a guy, and you're like, oh, Chaney's gonna hate this guy, but through circumstances, he actually learns to like the guy, but then suddenly when they go on a business trip carrying a bunch of lions, they meet a woman who's supposed to be an Asian woman, the stereotypical dragon lady, as these films would often deal with, who seduces his daughter's fiancé, and you learn that this woman is also his daughter's mother. So there's another incestual kind of thing that's going along. And in this one, Chaney is actually pretty much the good guy. He's the one trying to push things in the right direction. And it's his daughter and her fiancé who are going through all these complications, and this terrible, motherly figure who gets involved in. It ends the only way these movies can. Gorilla gets loose and murders any of the bad people.
I will watch this movie because this won't be my last go around in the career of Tod Browning. I'm eager to see this.
And finally, we saved the best for last, Freaks. One of the, I would say, most famous horror movies that has ever been made, I would say.
By the way, horror movie is an interesting
term to use for any of the Tod Browning films.
Because, this is the first Shocktober episode, by the way. I don't think we mentioned that.
There we go.
Okay, we got that out of the way.
Yep.
Tod Browning was making these movies before the horror film was really a genre in Hollywood. There were mysteries, and there were, shockers and thrillers, and
look at Germany, like Dr. Caligari, kind of like expressionist nightmares, but the genre conventions of the horror film that would often be defined with the Universal monster pictures. Tod Browning would participate, but he was working way before that.
And people like Bela Lugosi, when they became famous, were often referred to as Mystery Man,
Yeah.
Like the famous Ben Stiller film.
Mystery Men. Of course, all of the famous horror movie characters coming together to stop some crime.
But Freaks is where, it all comes together. This is the movie that all of his weird obsessions have been building up towards. A film with a cast mostly of actual circus sideshow people.
Which means that the film walks a fine line, and many people agree or disagree, of whether it's exploitation of these people or it's a sympathetic portrait of their day-to-day life.
When it came out, it was famously not a success. Most of the reviews, not all, but most, were very unfavorable and just sort of treated it as, why would Hollywood do this? This is such a symbol of Hollywood excess and we need censorship. Many of the reviews seemed upset that they just had to look at people with these deformities.
The idea that you would put these people's deformities on screen to see my clean eyes. How dare you offend me like this?
And they would usually wrap it up in this idea that, oh, you're exploiting them. You know, it would be better if these people were just locked away where nobody could see them.
Where they could perform at the circuses, where they get enjoyment and they live their lives.
And good people wouldn't have to see them because that would be exploitative.
And the thing about Freaks is that it's not really a horror film until the last 15 minutes, and most of the film is spent with these characters just going by their day-to-day life and getting involved in these small melodramas that are only odd if you consider that these are not who you see on screen all the time.
And you get rapidly desensitized to how strange they are. There's the first shot where you see them frolicking in the forest where, you know, there are a number of, the incorrect term is pinheads, but that's how they're referred. There's a guy with no legs who moves by his arms.
There's a guy with no arms or legs who's, I think they actually, again, the exploitative name like Torso Boy.
The human torso. Who lights a cigarette using only his mouth, which has to be seen to be believed. By the way, that guy in real life had a kid.
I remember reading about this.
Think about that.
I mean, do not look into the lives of the people who appeared in the film, because a lot of them are very miserable. The man without legs had a very vicious robbery happen to him, and his life did not pick up from there.
But, you know, some of them had okay lives. Some of them had roller coaster lives, like the conjoined twins, Daisy and Violet, I believe are their names. They were up for most of their lives up until this movie came out were basically slaves. They would be toured around, you know, by their sinister guardians. But before this movie came out, they were able to sue and get separated from their guardian. And then they more or less spent the rest of their career on their own terms, you know, doing the same kind of work.
Yeah, but there's difference between slavery and, you know, but the movie.
So the first time you see all these people, it's a huge shock. But
the film also treats it like, we know that you're going to act shocked because there's passerbys that are like, how dare you have these people out here, like, get them out of here. And you see that they're just scared and they were just having fun, minding their own business. And the idea that these passerbys are like, get them out of here, get them out of here. And they're like, no, they're just fine. Like, they're okay. Because that's how society treats them.
And then you see them at this stop that the carnival has taken, and they all have their own little lives, little dramas. You know, the conjoined twins each have fiancés. There's a great bit where one of them kisses her fiancé and the other one, you know, looks up in ecstasy. I guess, and then, you know, you look at that and think, well, what else can she feel? Right?
Maybe nothing, because they don't share those nerves, but who knows?
Maybe nothing. You see Schlitzie, who is my favorite character. The human skeleton has just had a baby with the bearded lady.
And they're very happy that this happened.
And there's a real sense of community that develops with all these people.
But, when the temptress Cleopatra and the strongman Hercules get involved, they find out that one of the little performers, Hans, played by Harry Earls, has a large fortune, and that perhaps if one of them were to marry him and Hans would die, they would get that fortune for themselves.
Hans, who is engaged to be married to Frida, played by
Daisy Earls,
who is actually his sister in real life, he is tempted by Cleopatra, who he calls the most beautiful big woman I've ever seen. And, eventually Hans marries Cleopatra, which leads to the most famous scene of the movie.
One of us.
Where, in seeing this table full of so-called freaks.
Just happy.
Just happy. And inducting her into the freak community.
Yeah, you're like, listen, now you're part of our family, and we can consider you one of our own. You are not an outsider anymore.
But
you married Hans.
She doesn't want that. Yeah. She doesn't want that, and she launches onto her plot to murder Hans. But,
which involves some poisoning.
But this is a community, so, you hurt one, you hurt them all, which leads to a horrifying finale, which is still horrifying, I think.
It is, where the freaks decide to fight back against Cleopatra and Hercules, who the film actually sets up in a way that, like, maybe these freaks were going to kill them anyway, but they're attacking Hans already. Like, they want to kill him, and they're just coming to his defense. in the most, like, Tod Browning shoots it in a way where it is scary. That
no music.
And that the otherness is supposed to be like, whoa, because you have, like, the living torso crawling through the mud with a knife between his teeth.
And this is what I talk about when I say there were amazing images in Tod Browning's movies.
Yes.
You know?
And it all builds to this sequence that the film ends on where it's genuinely horrifying when you see it.
Still, the reveal of what's happened to her.
And we should point out that this film is also famous for being cut of like 25 minutes. So it's about an hour in the form that it exists now, but there's supposed to be like, I don't think any scenes as horrifying as what you see, but the same kind of horror and melodrama and comedy. A lot of Tod Browning films are famous for being cut down. Freaks is the most famous one. Because it does end with them cornering Cleopatra, and then suddenly you go back to what bookended the film, a carnival barker talking about the freaks, which was supposedly a reshoot that they added at the end of the movie, and you finally see what happened to Cleopatra, which is...
I'd rather not spoil it.
Oh, you don't want to spoil it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, if you haven't seen Freaks...
Let them see it for themselves.
We can say it, and, like, I've read about it before. I saw it, like, a decade ago. But when you actually see it, you're like, oh, that's gross. And richly deserved, I would say.
And you don't fully comprehend what you're looking at when you do see it for the first time. It takes a second to sink in.
Because, like, originally, Hercules, a strong man, was supposed to be castrated by the freaks. And the joke was that you would see him singing falsetto at the end of the movie, and, like, that's the indication that he's been, like, his balls have been cut off.
Yeah. But it's, I think, quite a beautiful film in many ways. Like...
well, it's a film that I don't think had come before and has come since, because you just can't make a movie like that because it deals so directly with the experience they have in this exploitative milieu, the circus, but also the way that they deal with it and the connections that they make and the way that they live their lives.
And it really humanizes them. And, you know, I mean, one reason why the movie was so unloved at the time and why movies like this have never really been made is that, like, audiences don't want to look at these people.
Yeah.
You know, it's as simple as that.
That they are the other, and that, like, what Tod Browning is doing is so sympathetic. The idea of, like, oh no, but they are real people. But audiences, like, from the get-go, they just will not connect with that on any level. They won't even give it a chance to do that.
But the thing is, this movie never quite disappeared because Dwayne Esper, the famous Schlockmeister, licensed it to play at grindhouses and, you know, road shows. And he played it for, I want to say, 25, 30 years. You know, MGM, after it initially failed at the box office, just wanted nothing to do with it. And this is a very strange movie to come out of MGM, isn't it? Like, MGM is the most glamorous studio.
Yeah, like, I don't know what they expected to get from Tod Brown, maybe one of his other pop boilers, but, like, this is a film that I can understand producers seeing and being like, well, this is not what we asked for. And Tod Browning's like, you wanted a film with, like, circus people. What else do you want?
Well, there is a famous story that Irving Thalberg, the boy wonder producer at MGM, who brought Tod Browning to MGM, when he commissioned a script for this movie, he said, give me something horrifying. And then 2 weeks later, the writer walks into his office, and Browning's got, like, his head on his desk and said, well, I asked for something horrifying, and I got it. Who knows if that's actually true?
But I feel that, like, audiences would have liked it better if they were just treated like monsters the entire way through. Like, if it was a circus that showed up and that, you know, started murdering people, like, audiences would have been like, yeah, this is fun. But the idea of you having to spend time with them, like, audiences don't like that. Like, I don't want to humanize these people that I want to treat as, like, others and monsters.
Well, you know, it's complicated because, so, mainstream audiences, the audiences who would go to the nice theaters, were okay with Lon Chaney playing a disabled person.
Because he's a normal person playing a disabled person.
But not with the real thing. However, this movie would play very successfully on the grindhouse circuit for 25 years before it was rediscovered by, you know, auteur critics and the counterculture in the 60s and 70s. But before that, many people went to see it because
they want to look at the freaks.
Yeah, so, like, this dual nature exists in all of us, right?
And, I mean, the film can be successful in either form, really.
Yeah.
And after Freaks, that was, like, a real tough hit to Tod Browning, who had tried to make good with Dracula, and it seemed like that's just what they wanted from him. Like, he made Mark of the Vampire 3 years after, in 1935. In 1936, he made The Devil Doll, where he wasn't even credited on it. And, I mean, you hear the title, The Devil Doll, and you're like, oh boy. Nah, it's just old hammy Lionel Barrymore doing his Mrs. Doubtfire shtick, dressed as a woman, creating little people who are actually pretty ingeniously projected on screen, but they're just little people. people. They're not actual dolls, which would have been awesome. And he's taking revenge on people.
Mark of the Vampire was a modest success, but it really feels like, especially after you watch Freaks and you watch some of his silent movies, it really feels like a retreat into the familiar.
Well, yeah, a lot of people would say that Tod Browning never made the transition from silence to talkies, that he just could never grasp it.
He was never good with dialogue.
No, he was not. And so he ended up being one of those directors that was just kind of put to pasture. That, like, he died in the 60s, but, like, he stopped making movies and then 1939 was his last one.
And none of the other movies after Freaks, aside from Mark of the Vampire, were a success.
So I would still say that, like, after watching all these Tod Browning films, none of them popped out at me and were like, aha, no, he is really great. It's just that he has his obsessions. And while he can craft an image if he's working with someone like Carl Freund, a amazing cinematographer, but I don't think that interested him. I think what interested him was, like, Lon Chaney's tortured performance. Like, I was reading some stories of when he shot Mark of the Vampire, that he was supposedly, like, a terrible taskmaster. And that, like, he would make sure the bat would fly, like, a very specific way, or that it looked this way. And he would always complain to all of the actors, Lon Chaney would know how to do this.
Many of the people who worked on Freaks described him as a sadist.
Yes.
But he apparently got along very well with the Freaks.
So, like, I guess it was a weird place where he wanted these very specific things, but he couldn't deliver what mainstream audiences wanted in this talkie era.
I think I like him a bit more than you do. Like, I think Freaks alone, it's like
Freaks is so good.
He has that one masterpiece. And the other ones, I like his weird, gross obsessions.
Yeah, I guess his obsessions don't really, like, reflect what interests me, and that's what it comes down to. Like, this Lon Chaney, like, woman that he wants and he'll do anything for. Maybe if I was 12, I'd be like, yeah, Lon Chaney, I can get on his side.
I think I just like somebody who has a worldview that dark, and who
keeps working,
was able to flourish in the studio system for a while.
And it was until, like, the studio system was like, all right, but you got to deliver some entertainment. Like, that's what people want.
Yeah, there's also an element of mystery to him for me as well, because he never gave an interview about his filmmaking. And
he had no interest. Supposedly, when he stopped making movies, he just went on with his life and did other stuff that wasn't related to movies. You know what? I can see it. I can see where, like, that kernel of, like, ooh, I want to see more of his, because you want to discover, like, who was this person, Tod Browning, who made one of the most well-known films, Dracula, ever, and, like, we know almost nothing about him.
Yeah.
So, as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And this week on our Patreon, we're talking about vampires. But not the kind that you know. We're talking about hoppin' vampires. We focus on the classic Hong Kong cinema film, Mr. Vampire, and we kind of talk about why we're interested in that kind of stuff. And we even recommend a few films from the canon. You should check it out. I think hopping vampire films are very special, and I just want to share it with as many people as I want. Impress your friends. Go to Halloween parties and be like, oh, I have a different horror film. And you can just slide Mr. Vampire or other films that we mentioned across the table and impress everybody there.
And watch them be like, I don't like this.
No, you'll love it. Oh, you mean with the other people?
The other people won't like it.
Yeah, but you'll like it. That's what's important.
Yeah.
So it's $5 a month. You get 4 episodes every month. And this month, we're doing nothing but horror stuff. And I can say that we're also going to be talking about, like, the rougher horror stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff that we wouldn't want people searching our name and finding out. So definitely become a Patreon subscriber for that. Our first letter is from Sam Sanchez, and he goes, hello, guys. First time writing in, I believe, though I've been listening for about 2 years now. You guys are somehow one of maybe 4 Canadian film podcasts I listen to, which makes a lot of sense living in California and all. How dare you stop listening to those other podcasts?
Wait, are there other Canadian film podcasts?
I don't know.
Well, there's Michael and Us.
Michael and Us, and there's also No Such Thing as a Bad Movie.
Right.
Important Cinema Club. I guess if you're listening to some back episodes of Loose Cannons.
Yeah.
There's 4 right
you're
there.
Right.
Yeah,
you're
there
right.
is 4 Canadian film podcasts. So you're good. And the letter continues, I pretty much watch along with you guys episode to episode. Ooh, that's dedication. As most episodes are a good way to force myself to catch up on stuff that have been on my watch list anyway. Kind of linked to your discussion about making lists for an occasion or time of year, like Shocktober, and plowing through it, which I intend to try this year. I did something similar this month. Another podcast I listened had their second annual Czechtember to honor the Czech New Wave, and I decided to dive head on and watch a Justin the Clue level of films to cross off as many Czech films I had on my watch list. I ended up watching over 50 according to my letterbox. which is insane. Being on vacation with nothing better to do has been key. Watching so many of these has been such a rich experience and leads me to believe this would make a good episode, or at the very least I'd be curious to hear your opinion on some of these. There's a few key must to check out, and some that are also more obscure. Some very fun movies in there mixed among some not so fun, yet still great movies. An episode to hopefully keep in mind for the future. Thanks guys, keep it up. Sam, Patreon supporter Sanchez. Ooh, that's nice. So,
is that his real name?
Yeah. Did you legally change your name? Because it should be the Important Cinema Club Patreon supporter.
You know what
Sanchez.
I'm waiting for the first person to do a tattoo of our logo. Don't actually do that.
Don't do that, please. No. What would we give them? Our gratitude.
I think they would get to choose a topic.
Yeah, they would choose a topic.
I mean, for that. Yeah.
I mean, we should do like another fan contest coming up
First
in November.
person to get a tattoo.
No, don't do that. So as far as Czech films go, they've been I feel like talked about a lot recently. I think a bunch of DVD box sets come out. Not something I'm that familiar with, if I've got to be honest. And I don't want to say any movies that I'm like, I very like this Czech film, because I'm probably going to get them confused with in other countries.
But let's just put it out there that folks watch some Czech movies.
Yeah, thank you for this letter, Sam, and you should go and check them out. Not 50.
Check
them out. And that would be an interesting subject to do, because me and Will have been talking about doing, kind of countries.
Yeah, national cinemas.
That, like, people don't talk about that often. That if we did a director, people would be like, well, I don't know who that is. So national cinemas, like we did with that Bollywood episode, are good, like, entry points. So again, thanks for that letter, Patreon supporter Sam Sanchez. And if you have any other questions for us, comments, other listeners, not particular just Sam, email us at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. Hopefully they're spooky this month, because we are officially in Shocktober at this.
I want to suck your blood.
Well, I don't know if a whip sound is very Halloween-y, but sure. So next week, staying spooky, because we're doing full moon entertainment. And you're like, wait, what's that? If you were a kid in the 90s and you walked into the horror section of your local video store, you would see all these painted covers mostly filled with puppets, and you'd go, wow, what is this? And I'd be like, Puppet Master 3? There's a cowboy in this one? Well, I can't imagine seeing these movies. These films were all spearheaded by a man named Charles Band, and Full Moon Video, or Entertainment, or Productions, or whatever the other dozen names that he would call his video label, were something that I feel hasn't been recreated since and could only exist at the beginning of the video boom, which is making films just for video that created a cult around them. There was a fan club, you could buy action figures, and he mostly dealt in horror films. Puppet Master, Castle Freak, Head of the Family, comedic pictures that dealt with horror iconography, and we're going to be talking about the company and specifically Charles Band himself, the man.
What movies should I watch?
You should watch Castle Freak.
That's the one where a guy gets his ding-dong ripped off.
I don't know. You'll have to watch to find out. Puppet Master, because that's probably Full Moon's most iconic production, and that they continue to make new movies to this day, even though a studio also owns the rights to Puppet Master and are making parallel Puppet Master films, but we'll get into that when we talk about the episode.
Wow.
And I want you to watch Ginger Dead Man 2, The Passion of the Crust. And you'll be like, well, should I watch the first Ginger Dead Man? Nah, you don't need to. They sum it up over, I think, 10 minutes in the second one. And it's also a kind of like satirical rib poke at what Full Moon used to be. This production studio that, as Charles Band said when he started, we want to make 2,000 movies by the year 2000. So we'll talk about Charles Band and this insane dream next week.
Did they get to that number?
They did not. Okay. And we'll talk about why that is and why Charles Band has made a million companies since then. So until then, my name is Justin Clue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. Just a reminder, if you haven't yet, to follow us on Facebook. We have a group now, The Important Cinema Club. Just do it in the search bar. You're able to bring it up. And to follow us on Twitter, which you can do again just by searching Important Cinema Club. And this week, check out filmtrap.com, because I put together for October a Shocktober movie checklist. Essentially, 31 categories that you need to slot in with a movie if you want to watch 31 movies in October. And it's just to push your boundaries with things like a luchador film where they fight monsters, or a silent horror movie after the invention of sound. And you just have to go out there, find the movies, watch them, complete this list. And for people that do, there will be something special at the end of October. If you have any questions or you don't know which movies to fill the list, again, tweet at us or join us on the Facebook group, The Important Cinema Club. When you were a kid, Will, what were some of the most notable costumes that you dressed up as?
I dressed up as...
For Halloween, not just every day.
Yeah, I dressed up as Batman 3 times.
3 times?
Did
your mother have to put a hand on your shoulder and go, that's enough? Like, that too many dress-ups.
Well, I do remember, I would wear my Batman costumes oftentimes, not on Halloween as well. Like, I remember...
Fight crime.
I remember going to the grocery store once in my Batman costume, and people would, point and say, hey, it's Batman. And remember, I would have been 5
so
at the time.
So you're like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, yeah, they actually think I'm Batman. And then I remember my dad and I were going to go to the library, and I said, I'm going to go get my Batman costume. And he said, you shouldn't do that. And I said, why not? And my dad said, well, if people see Batman at the library, they may think there's a crime, and we wouldn't want to upset people. And I went, oh, okay. And now, looking back, I can appreciate how funny that was.
At least he didn't say, the Joker's going to come after you if he thinks you're the real Batman.
Oh, yeah.
So
that
you
would
lay down terrified
very
at night.
Scary.
He picked the actual good parental line that he fed you to keep his dumb boy from dressing up as Batman and going into public.
My first Batman costume, my mom made it.
Yep.
And I was so excited. I really wanted it. And then I remember I still remember it, the day that she showed it to me in the closet. Mm-hmm. And I was afraid of it. It was
really?
Almost too awe-inspiring a symbol.
Oh, so it seemed like this was probably a costume that Batman himself wore.
Well, it's just this symbol of goodness, and how I'm not even worthy of wearing it. And so my mom will still tell this story that we had to work bit by bit, okay, just touch it, maybe put on the mask and work your way up to being able to wear the
Did you feel powerful when you were under it?
Oh.
So how old were you at this point? 5, I guess?
I think my first Batman costume was when I was 4.
Okay.
Or it might have been before that. Maybe I was 3. I don't know.
I remember my mother getting me a Captain America costume, which is baffling to me because, 1, I wasn't allowed to read comic books, and even if I did, I wasn't reading Captain America. And it's not like I was a fan of the Albert Pune films or anything like that, so I could only make the assumption that it was in the discount bin somewhere, and it's the only reason that I got it.
Captain America was not a popular superhero in the 90s.
No, he was not. And I guess maybe because of that, when I was growing up, other than a costume that was the skeleton mascot for the Goosebump book series, I don't even have that many vivid memories of dressing up in costume. Because I think that was maybe a thing that my birthday is on November 1st, which is right after Halloween. So there's kind of a excitement building towards it. And it's always been weird, I feel, for my mother to we're really excited for Halloween, and then we're really excited for your birthday. So she would quietly slip through maybe, you can dress up in a generic ghost and you can just go do your trick-or-treating. And then the next day is the real party, because that's when your birthday is.
Yeah.
So as far as stuff that was inspired by movies that I would dress up as, I never had a Batman. And to this day, for the last decade, I don't think I've properly dressed up in a Halloween costume since. Do you go to movies and you're well, 5th time for Batman this year, or do you go I'm gonna dress up as something else?
Well, I don't really dress up anymore. Or if I do dress up for a Halloween thing, it'll just be the most perfunctory thing.
You're gonna put a mask on that you bought or something that?
Yeah, basically. I do have a Darth Vader mask that I have and a little cape that I'll sometimes put on.
You and your girlfriend aren't couples costume this year, Mickey and Minnie Mouse?
We haven't talked about it yet. We're still
first
early.
Year, yeah.
We're still early.
There's going to have to be that conversation. You know what? I'll give her a call and we can have that conversation.
We were together for Halloween last year, but we just didn't.
Okay, yeah, but it was new, though. Now it's people...
well, now that we're firmly entrenched as a couple, is now the time for couples Halloween costumes?
To be that annoying people that show up and you're oh my God.
You're telling me you and Emily have never done a couple's costume?
We did. We dressed up as I was Frankenstein as a secret agent, and she was Bride of Frankenstein as a secret agent. But I think that was a real, like, whatever there is.
Right.
Like, let's just put it on, and that's what we'll be. So it's like a really vague niche costume.
So just wearing a tie and a jacket.
That you have to explain to the person. Yeah. And other than that, she's usually done, like, very vivid. Like, she was Furiosa one year, and she built her whole costume and stuff like that. And me, I just probably sat there in a vampire cape of some kind.
I dressed as Jerry Lewis once in college.
Did you have to explain it to people?
Well, of course, but but my friends knew who it was, and that's all that mattered. Like, I put Brightgleam in my hair, and
so wait, which Jerry Lewis were you?
Like telethon era.
Oh wait, so like sweaty and fat
older Jerry Lewis. Yeah.
Oh, so you weren't like, hey ladies.
Well,
you like wacky.
Well, of course I did that too.
But it was like you. Yeah. So you're doing that amazing thing where you have to do like the tired shtick of Jerry Lewis. 2 levels of acting there.
Yeah.
I mean, but like thinking about all these costumes, like I was still obsessed with horror movies when I was a kid, and I would see all the family movies. Do you have any memories, and I'm just tying this in because we're doing a screening of it in a week, of Casper, the family film?
Oh, yeah, The Friendly Ghost.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I had it on VHS as a kid, but it was never a particular favorite of mine.
No?
I mean, I probably saw it 7 or 8 times, but just because I saw every movie 7 or 8 times back then.
And it's such a weird movie. It's about death and people dying and turning into ghosts. I mean, Eric Idle is in it, so all you Monty Python heads.
That's right. Eric Idle and Kathy Moriarty are the villains.
I mean, Dan Aykroyd is in it, playing his Ghostbuster character.
There's also the scene where Bill Pullman's face turns into Mel Gibson and somebody else,
the
right?
Crypt Keeper, and I don't get no respect.
Oh, Rodney Dangerfield, right.
You know, because the kids love Clint Eastwood, Rodney Dangerfield, Mel Gibson, and the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah.
So really what I'm trying to say is that if you live in Toronto, you gotta come to the screening we're doing next weekend at the Royal Cinema of Casper the Friendly Ghost. When are you going to see it other than that?
35 millimeter, I hope.
No, not on 35 millimeter. But there will be candy and tons of games and ghost-related stuff. And I think the one thing that if you live in Toronto and you have kids, we put together like a pre-show with like full animated cartoons as if you were like going to see a movie in I guess like the 50s or 60s for 30 minutes before the film. And you're not going to get that anywhere else. So come to the Royal Cinema, come see Casper, have yourself a spooky time.